Two Poor Bastards contains explicit content and drunken ramblings. Listener discretion is advised. Two friends get drunk, talk whiskey and their favorite pop culture obsessions. This is Eric.
And this is Kyle.
Welcome to episode 3 of Two Poor Bastards. Tonight we're going to be... Well, shit, we won't say tonight. On this episode, we will be covering...
I mean, it is nighttime. We could say tonight.
Oh, well,
they could listen to it in the morning, but hey, it's nighttime for us.
It's nighttime for us, yeah. It's what works out for us is nighttime. So anyways, this episode we're going to be covering Matthew McConaughey's and Wild Turkey's Long Branch bourbon. So it's an interesting little deal here. And then you've got your piece. What's your piece on tonight?
So the piece that I'll be talking about tonight is we'll take a little diversion from the heady movies that we've been talking about. And I just kind of like to discuss the current state of retro gaming. Talk about how I got into it, you know, my ideas on things, my outlook on it, and then, you know, I'll bump things off of you and see what you think about it, and we'll just go from there.
All right, sounds good. So I'm going to read the official press release, I suppose, from the site from Wild Turkey themselves. So obviously it's Matthew McConaughey and master distiller Eddie Russell, who's the son of the other Jimmy Russell.
True master distillers. That term gets thrown around a lot, but that's the real deal right there.
And with Wild Turkey, they distill their own product. So that's going to be an important distinction after I kind of run through the bourbon and that sort of thing. So it's a rare small batch bourbon, 8 years old. Wild Turkey is refined with Texas mesquite and oak charcoals for deeper flavor and complexity. The aroma is a balanced blend of vanilla and, I put this in parentheses, spices, flavors of caramel, pear, and hints of citrus, and the palate round out the palate, while subtle smoky finish is buttery smooth with notes of gentle pepper and toasted oak. So let's get in there.
We're going to get in and we're going to take a smell of this and we'll see if we agree or not.
Yeah, so remember those, and I'll read them back to you if you want to know what they're saying.
First thing I get is the nose on this is what I would describe as very thin.
Yeah.
So not a whole lot of impact.
I mean, I smell the oak, the charcoal for sure. I don't smell vanilla.
Something a little oaky, something a little grain alcohol-y, too like industrial. And honestly, whatever I'm getting, I really can't pinpoint what it is.
It's very
ambiguous. It's an ambiguous nose to it.
So let's taste it and see what we get here.
Citrusy, I'd agree with. I'm getting a faint thing of something like orange zest.
I could taste that.
I wouldn't say vanilla.
No.
For any aspect of it, whether it's the nose, the taste, or the finish.
I have definitely a sweet. I could taste the corn aspect of it. There's a little bit of a sweetness to it. Mm-hmm. Definitely smoky. I will say, yep, it's smoky.
A little bit of that. Very thin mouthfeel as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is only 43% alcohol as well. I'm highly reminded of the night that we were just drinking regular Wild Turkey.
Yep.
Which is usually aged about 8 years.
Yep.
And so this very similar proof.
So, from what I gather, this is regular Wild Turkey, just run through a different finishing process.
When it's says on here on the label on the front, Texas Mesquite Charcoal Refined. Really, what I'm taking out of this is regular Wild Turkey charcoal filtered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a technique that you can use to take some harshness out of some crappy whiskey and make it a little bit better. I mean, like, same thing. If you take a really junky vodka and run it through a Brita filter a few times,
you're gonna make it.
It's gonna class it up. But it definitely has the taste of something that has been charcoal filtered.
Mm-hmm.
Now, company that also does that a lot is George Dickel, and you can definitely tell. And all the Orphan Barrel whiskeys are bottled at the George Dickel distillery, and a lot of that stuff is overaged, and what they do to kind of make it more palatable is charcoal filtered as well.
Gotcha.
So this is definitely that, and I can get that out of there.
With this, it's not as thin tasting as regular Wild Turkey. Like regular Wild Turkey, this has a little more bite to it.
I'm thinking it gains that from the very slight bump in proof on it.
And that could very well be. And I taste the smoky, I taste the sweetness. I don't really get the pepper. I don't get the...
I kind of get that on the back end of the finish in the back of my throat.
Okay.
It's a little peppery.
Okay, so and I suppose it did say it finishes in a buttery smooth with notes of gentle pepper and toasted oak. So yeah, you're right. After letting it settle, I do taste a little pepper on the back of my tongue.
Maybe buttery biscuit flavor as well, kind of very light hint of that. Overall, what I would say about it, though, this is a very unremarkable whiskey.
I'm not impressed as far as
so it's like, distinction. Yeah, I know Wild Turkey has Matthew McConaughey as basically like a brand ambassador.
Yeah.
Now, so
that's exactly the bourbon piece that we're going to do today is kind of a two-part thing. So yes, it is. We are drinking the Long Branch thing, and we're going to kind of get into the marketing, if you will, of it, and kind of how they sell it, and then we're going to go tie into an article I read in a conversation that we had from the last episode, which I think is really relevant to this situation. So we're going to get into a little bit more of like the press release. So it says Matthew McConaughey and legendary Turkey Distillery are proud to announce the introduction of Long Branch, a collaboration between the iconic whiskey brand's creative director and master distiller, Eddie Russell, inspired by Kentucky and Texas roots. This rare small batch Kentucky bourbon is refined with Texas mesquite and oak charcoals, a unique method that deepens the flavor and complexity of the whiskey. This launch marks the first time Wild Turkey has unveiled a product that bears a signature of someone other than master distillers Jimmy and Eddie Russell. Wild Turkey Long Branch is the latest collaboration from the multi-year partnership of Academy Award-winning winner McConaughey, who has served as the brand's creative director since 2016, has worked behind the camera and in front of the television commercials to reintroduce the world to Wild Turkey. This new bourbon is a natural evolution of their partnership. The name is inspired by friends that form the longest branches of our family trees.
Oh.
The connection that McConaughey and Russells have to both the great state of Kentucky and Texas were a major inspiration for the collaboration. McConaughey's parents met at the University of Kentucky, a mere 15 miles away from the Wild Turkey Distillery, while Eddie Russell's youngest son, Bruce, now lives in McConaughey's hometown of Austin, Texas. Here's a quote. Long Branch, in the simplest form, is an extended hand, inviting a friend into your family, McConaughey says. So the branch that was extended to me from the Russells was a long one that reached from Kentucky to Texas and back again. I offered the mesquite from my great state to add to their legendary Kentucky whiskey, and together we made Long Branch. To create Long Branch's signature flavor, McConaughey and Russell spent countless hours sharing notes, and after 2 years of testing, perfected a proprietary process that combines two separate charcoal filtration methods to give Long Branch a smooth and full finish. The filtration process uses charcoal made from white oak, and the second uses charcoal made from Texas mesquite wood, giving the bourbon notes of smoky sweetness. Made with 8-year-old Wild Turkey bourbon. To me, that basically says it's small batch in the sense that they only ran a small amount of it through the charcoal filter. Wild Turkey Long Branch is an exceptional bourbon with a bright gold color and aroma that is balanced blend of vanilla and spices, flavors of caramel, pearl, hints, blah, blah, blah. I kind of read through that whole thing. And then when we were creating Wild Turkey Long Branch, we talked at length about how to make a product that represents elements of both Texas and Kentucky, said Wild Turkey Master Distiller Eddie Russell. Our goal was to make a straight bourbon whiskey with a soft sweetness that was still unmistakably Wild Turkey. The result is a bourbon that we both truly enjoy drinking neat and looking forward to sharing it with others. Matthew McConaughey has been ingrained in Wild Turkey's brand as a creative director for several years now, says a person and stuff.
2 years.
2 years now, just many years. Long Branch, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's kind of the piece. So there's a whole bunch of bullshit words and hyperbole and building up this image. And so the secondary piece is there's a lot of companies cashing in on the bourbon craze. So whiskey is like all the rage right now. And so tying into the Michter's conversation about how they just recently started distilling their own bourbon, and that's not going to hit the market until
however many years they
decide to 8 years, 8 years or so, or whatever it is.
If they did it right, I'm sure they'll probably release something quicker than that, or use it in some kind of blend, add their younger stuff to older reserves that they have. I'm sorry if you heard my eyes roll during that story about it. It's
and that's the reality though is that it's a common theme that with whiskeys, it seems like in particular they're really trying to not just sell the product of bourbon itself, but this whole image.
Let's sell a false history.
Exactly.
Let's paint this magnificent picture, this grand image of how things are going.
Right. So,
which I don't know. I don't really give a shit about that.
Right. So, so Eddie Russell is legitimately a master distiller. He took over from his father in 2015, and he's the son of master distiller, as you said, Jimmy Russell. He's in the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. He, is a 30-plus year whiskey veteran and creator of Wild Turkey Spiced, Diamond Anniversary, co-creator of Russell's Reserve. So he's got a few things under his belt. An actual true master distiller works in a distillery that they make distill specifically their own product.
Yeah, these are people who know it, who have been doing it their entire lives, and that kind of thing. The term master distiller basically can be given to anyone these days. There's no criteria that says for sure, this is what it's got to be to do this. But people are coming in at these non-producer distillers, and they're appointing, quote unquote, this is our master distiller. They haven't distilled a drop. And somehow they get called a master distiller when there's people like Jimmy and Eddie Russell out there who have been doing this their entire lives, who are legitimately people who deserve the title.
As much as I will say Wild Turkey, to me, is a blander bourbon. It's a lower proof, so it doesn't have as much. It's not bad. I'm not hating on Wild Turkey by any stretch.
If I'm drinking turkey, it's going to be 101, so 101 proof.
There you go.
That's a good, solid, everyday standby. I could drink that every day and not have a problem with it. It's a little on the nuttier side for my taste, but I mean, it will do the trick. It will definitely do the trick. Now, going into Russell's Reserve, Russell's Reserve 10-year, that shit's awesome. That's good. The rye, Russell's Reserve rye, that's good too. They even have, regular Russell's Reserve is a 10-year, and that's regular one where the barrels all get mixed together. They also have a version that is single barrel too. And like I said before, with all single barrels, it's hit or miss. I've had better luck with just the standard 10-year one. And the price point on it is really great. It's right around 30 to 35
that's
bucks.
Not bad. That's a great price point.
And I definitely give that, 2 huge thumbs up. And I guess we'll have to review that one coming up.
Absolutely. So I was excited to do this episode because it allowed me to do a lot more research. Me being the layman and getting into this. So as we're doing these episodes and I'm listening to you talk, I'm learning a lot about.
You're getting real pumped up,
I'm getting
aren't you?
soups pumped up.
There's a lot to learn.
There's so much to learn. And so I was really excited to have the opportunity to do this episode, the whiskey portion of the episode. So based off of the conversation that you had last episode, and there's an article that I wrote about basically saying, beware the hype of bourbons.
So much hype.
So let me get into a few things here. So the article goes into a specific bourbon producer that is they're not a distiller, and they do so the eye-rolling aspects of this isn't too bad. Like, there's nothing in the marketing for Long Branch that I would say is like too they're exaggerating maybe some of the notes of
They're romanticizing the story between McConaughey and the Russells, of course, but
so that's a good. It's not. There's no outright lies or misdirections. I don't think. I don't necessarily agree with how they describe it. Like, I don't necessarily catch those things, but I would not give it a false statement by any stretch. So this article goes about this other distiller that straight up fabricates like everything about it. So
Michter's.
It's not Michter's. No. So it's so what it was hold on here. Widow Jane bourbon. So Widow Jane proclaims to be distilled in Red Hook, New York. And
so they outright said that they were the distiller. They made the juice.
Yeah, they made the juice. So it says, the pure unique waters of Widow Jane Mine are what distill our artisanal spirits in the Red Hook of Brooklyn. The funny thing is
I like that accent that you took on for that.
Thank you. Maybe I'll pull it out later because I think I'm going to get lit tonight. So
all right.
We're going to get Makana sauced real good.
I like it.
So Widow Jane, the thing about it is Widow Jane doesn't distill its booze at all. They don't. What they sell, at least in the rest of the country, they don't make. They have a small distillery in Red Hook that you can only get their legitimate stuff that they do at their gift shop.
You have to be on site at the distillery
to get the actual
what they make, which I am completely going out on a limb and guessing here, but I'm guessing it's probably what they consider white dog, which is just what's distilled right away, not aged, clear, just booze.
I don't know.
We don't know. I'm just taking a guess here, a wild guess.
Exactly. So, one of the pieces that, what it's getting to is there's a lot of craft distillers that have popped up in the last couple of years. So it went from a couple of years ago to being 100 craft bourbon distilleries to over 1,400 today. So that's a gigantic explosion. The problem is the one thing that makes bourbon distinct from most other spirits is it has to be aged for 8 years. And there actually is a federal guideline to bourbon.
But it doesn't have to be aged for that long. That's ideal. But, yeah, I mean, to technically be considered bourbon instead of just whiskey, I mean, it has to be aged in new charred oak barrels.
So I'm going to give you the federal standards of whiskey bourbon.
Ooh, bring it on.
So it must be produced in the U.S. It must be made from at least 51% corn, at least. It must be aged in new oak containers and distilled to no more than 160 proof or 80% by volume, entered into the barrel for aging process at no more than 125 proof or 62%, and bottled at or above 80 proof or 40%. So
I like that you brought this up because I had planned on in the future going over things like that. So awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I told you, like, I got really excited about doing research for the bourbon part of the show. I learned a lot of stuff that I had no idea. So, and there's some terms that we need to talk about. So, with Widow Jane, they source their whiskey, or it's called barrel trading. So, what's happening is you have a lot of new craft breweries coming, or distillers coming up. You want to age your bourbon at least 8 years, typically for the sweet spot. But to get something to market, to cash in on the craze, you need to get a product to market right away. So the problem comes in is you have to wait 8 years before you even start selling your actual wares. So what's happening is that they're sourcing their bourbon to mass distillers. So I'm going to give you some things to be aware of reading a bottle. So the statute is that you have to state what state it's distilled in, and that is the only legal terminology on the bottle. Every other term on the bottle, so terms like small batch, craft, handcrafted, made by, produced by, bottled by, have no legal definitions. So they don't have to stand by. There's no precedent behind any of that stuff. So the only way you know that if it's made by that company, and that's even a stretch, is if they say it's from Kentucky and it's saying it's distilled in Kentucky, then it might be. But that's the only correlation you can make unless they state
specifically, which they don't have to.
They don't have to.
They don't have to disclose that.
But if you want to know if it's distilled by them, it has to state that it is distilled by. So Eagle Rare, Buffalo Trace, Wild Turkey, they say distilled by that company. So you know that it's from them. And it's really only important if you are, buying into a local producer. Say, something comes up in the cities and you want to support a local company.
Yeah, like you really got a boner for like your co-op booze.
You have to really pay attention to, is it actually distilled in the state or the place that you are, and you got to be aware of that. And otherwise, it's very deceptive. Everything on the bottle, except for the few legal terminologies that are on there that have to be there by law, you have no idea what you're getting into. So,
if I do remember right off the top of my head, I am getting a little McConaughey here, but the term straight bourbon, that kind of thing, there is a definition for that. If I remember right off the top of my head. I will look into that for the next episode to fact check it, but I think that one does have weight.
So with that, so the Widow Jane is actually distilled by a company called MGP, Midwest Grain Products. And this is not to slander MGP. I got no problems with them. So they're headquartered in the old Seagram's distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. They bought that distillery.
Indiana.
What's that?
Indiana.
Indiana. Yep. Thank you.
Yes.
Lawrenceburg.
There's a Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. There's a Lawrenceburg, Indiana. Yes.
Yes. Thank you for catching that. Because Wild Turkey is in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. MGP is in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. So they bought that distillery in 2011. That distillery specifically changed hands a bunch of times after Seagram's went bankrupt, and they're the last people that bought it. I don't know. It's with how MGP is set up, they're really set up to be anonymous behind the scenes.
They actually just released their own branded stuff.
Yep. So I also read that. So they have 50 different brands that they supply to. So think about that. They're the 5th largest distillery in the world, and they supply over 1 million barrels of bourbon a year. That is some numbers.
It is a lot. I mean, you think of a lot of stuff that's out there. If you have, a favorite bourbon or a favorite rye that you really like, there's a pretty good chance that it could come from there. And I will go on record as saying my absolute favorite rye whiskey comes from there.
Yeah.
So they use a 95% rye mash bill. So really rye, super peppery, spicy, awesome. Smooth Ambler got rye whiskey from them. Aged at their place, they released it. That is my favorite rye whiskey, is Smooth Ambler Old Scout Rye.
Yeah.
That shit is amazing. And you know what? They stopped releasing it because they couldn't keep up with demand, and the prices of it on the secondary market have shot through the roof. Although they did just state, I saw on Instagram yesterday, that they hope to next year release more. So I am real amped up.
So we need to like check that shit, make sure we're on it, and be like hawks and get it. Okay. So, and the whole point of this piece is like me being new and thinking about when I go into a liquor store and I'm trying to choose a good bourbon because I'm interested in bourbon, and I'm reading all of these labels, and we looked at the Michter's 10-year, and we discussed like the crazy shit that they have on that label that is just total bullshit.
Like, will this fantastical story rope you into buying this product?
Right. And so, as much as if you were, my problem is like when they create these fantastical stories and it's just total bullshit, it's a little disappointing getting suckered into that blatant kind of advertising thing. And this is not to hate on MGP. They make good product. They supply a lot of it. They're clearly successful. And I have no qualms with them. I have a qualm with someone
whoever else is releasing the stuff that they sourced from them.
Yeah, they're saying that it's like George Washington's fucking secret recipe from, the Knights of the Templar shit. You know what I mean? Like, that's a whole bunch of bullshit.
Indiana Jones bullshit going on here.
Yeah, exactly. Harrison Ford had to go into the Temple of Booze to get the recipe for this.
It used to be a place that had good whiskey, and then they started sourcing it, and it turned into Shia LaBeouf.
Yes. So, and that's really the thing, is just be aware. Understand that there's very little requirements that a producer is required to adhere to as far as descriptions, that the descriptors that they're using are just total hyperbole, made up. It means nothing. Like you're saying, being a master distiller, you could just appoint yourself.
I could make myself a master distiller right now.
Right now, and it would be.
I could claim that that's what I am.
So be aware what you're getting into. Read the label. If it says it's distilled by the brand that you're getting it, then more than likely it's going to be true. If it says anything other than distilled on that bottle, they probably sourced it. So you really have to be careful of all the shit around the bottle, all of like the secret sauce, blah, 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 because it's probably sourced by a company like MGP. And I don't know. There are companies that they'll buy barrels from them and then do their own finishing process to the bourbon.
Right. Depending on how you store something will radically affect the flavor. So not everything. Okay, say you were comparing two different bourbons that came from MGP. They're not going to taste the same. They'll be different just because of the environment that they're in.
Absolutely.
A good story going off of this is I had the chance last time I was in San Francisco to try a rye that came from MGP. I want to say the brand was like 1776 or something like that, like really jerking the revolutionary type thing.
Jesus, yeah.
So I saw the bottle, and of course right away I looked on the back to see where it came from, and was like, okay, Indiana. So I know what this is.
Yep.
I know what to kind of expect. There's a certain flavor profile that I know. So I was like, okay, it's MGP rye. It's probably pretty good. I like it. I took one sip of that shit, and it was just god-awful disgusting.
Really?
So whatever they did to it just totally ruined what could have been pretty good.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, you like what you like. You like a certain bourbon that you like. If you like, be it Michter's, and they're making their own. Again, they're actually making their own. And a lot of these companies, to get to market, they source it initially, and then once their bourbon ages, then they release their true own stuff, and then I'll believe a little more of the labeling, but they get ahead of themselves on sourced whiskey, which...
Well, if somebody's saying, like, here's our source stuff, here's this crazy story, we just started distilling our own product, and they try to apply that story to it. I'd be like, no, this shit was from 2015. There's no way that's pre-revolutionary George Washington hand job.
Yeah. And so that's the thing, is just being aware that, what you're getting. Don't buy, be skeptical of labels, be skeptical. You will like what you like, but don't act like a fool. So I watched this video on the article, and Chuck Schumer went to Kentucky and had the Widow Jane and gave it to Mitch McConnell and said, apparently New York produces the best bourbon in the world, and hands it to Mitch McConnell. But the ironic thing is it was distilled in the state that they were sitting.
Not in the state that they were sitting.
No, because they were in...
Unless they were in Indiana, if it is MGP.
Oh, yeah. So, sorry, I'm mistaken. They were in Kentucky, and Chuck Schumer was saying something to the effect that Kentucky doesn't produce the best bourbon and gives him the Widow Jane. But the ironic thing is it wasn't produced in fucking...
So he was trying to say, like, New York produces the best shit. But it came from Indiana.
And they did not at all. And so that, on the hindsight of things, he looks like a total tool because it was made in Indiana. So, okay, so just be aware. Don't look like a tool.
MGP puts out tight shit. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and that's fine. And at the end of the day, they do make good product. Not hating on MGP, but don't turn around to one of their private labels, the labels they have, and buy into the bullshit that they're... Because I think Whistle Pig is also done by MGP.
Canada. It's out of Canada. Unless they recently started sourcing from MGP.
I thought I saw something.
But that's also another non-distiller producer who has started distilling.
Gotcha.
So Whistle Pig started, and their farm stock version is like a blend of their older sourced stuff and the new stuff they have put out. And I haven't heard good news about that.
Well, they had a bottle at the Liquor Barrel. It was like $250 or some shit like that.
Yeah, that'd be their 15-year variety.
So, funny story. Liquor Barrel today, same dude who's always there. Same dude who tried to poke my fucking eye out.
Same dude who always tries to cut my hair.
He was there, and he was trying to get me to stock the shelves for him and, like, push all the booze forward in the coolers. And he's like, oh, do you need help? I'm like, no, dude, I'm good. He goes, I need help.
Yeah, he does. He does need
you
help.
do need. This is true. I'm like, and I said to him, this is an actual quote. I said, dude, I can't help you. There's no help for you.
And that's true. Nobody can help him.
Yeah. He goes, well, yeah, you can help me. You can help do this thing. And the boss is coming back.
But he's also slightly endearing because of that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. And then he's like, well, what do you got there? And I picked up that bottle. He goes, I didn't know that we sold that.
Oh, my God. Yes, he does.
Like, really, dude? Like, Jesus Christ. So that was my little thing on that. But
it's like, that is his thing, is to try hard to fuck with people, but do it unsuccessfully.
Yeah. He has his charms. It's like, he's kind of like that handicapped uncle that you're like, oh, you're cute. But otherwise, you're just like, I'm happy that I only see him at the liquor store. Let me just say that much.
Yeah.
He's really good in that moment. And then we could talk about him.
At any given night, you could probably see him across the street at Keenan's.
Oh, no. So, that's my piece on the whiskey. We went through the Long Branch. Again, it's the backstory, the official thing is heavily romanticized.
Tell everyone what Long Branch makes you feel after you drink it.
Like shit. So, thank you for reminding me, because I've already forgot that. So one of the things with Long Branch that's different than other bourbons is this shit, if I have one glass of it, one pour, I get a headache, like a bad headache from that shit. And I don't know what it is. And I could drink other bourbons all night long and be fine. And
yeah.
In this one, I have one glass, and I'm feeling like shit.
Like instant hangover. This is the Mad Dog 2020 of bourbon.
It's not instant. It's usually the next day. Like I feel kind of like shitty and have a headache,
like
or when I go to
Mad Dog
bed.
2020.
Yeah, exactly like the Mad Dog 2020. It's the Mad Dog 2020 of bourbon.
The Boone's Farm.
Oh, no.
The low alcohol content, but make you feel like shit.
Yeah. So what are your theories? Why would this give me feeling like shitty? Because it's not as high proof as other things that I drink.
I don't know. The really, really weird part is that when you filter something like that, it usually takes out the stuff that really gives you the bad headache or anything like that. And then the funny thing is, I wanted to say when you were talking about it earlier, it's like we use this charcoal filtering to instill this like bold flavor in it, and that always takes away. It always takes away. Unfiltered would be my preference any day of the week.
So they take regular wild turkey from my assumption.
They said in the thing that you read off, 8-year wild turkey.
So
and
why
they shove it through 2 filtering processes?
But it definitely tastes different than regular wild turkey. So you just think that they up the proof.
Smoked up mesquite that's in it. I mean, that would lead to a different flavor profile going away from the oak. The proof, like, you know, it's low, but it's not as low as the standard wild turkey. I don't know. It's a really weird product, and I feel like it doesn't have any place within wild turkey's regular run of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Was it like McConaughey shoehorning his way into getting something for being this quote-unquote brand ambassador? I don't know. Maybe, but I'd probably try to do the same thing. If Wild Turkey came to me and was like, hey, would you represent our product? I'd be like, well,
yes.
Yeah, but why don't you name something after me so I could be a cool bourbon guy because I enjoy it so much.
I want to be a bourbon guy. I want to name a thing after me.
So, like, change Russell's Reserve to Kyle's Reserve, please.
Yes.
Because that's the shit I really like. Or they have a Master's Keep series, Wild Turkey. They've released a few so far where it's supposed to take their older, better things and do a special release. Maybe I'd say name one of those after me.
So, going after the bottle, because we finished off what was left of a bottle. I mean, I do smell the mesquite more. Just going after the bottle.
Like the leftovers in the bottle.
I do smell the mesquite. It's a little iodine-y, a little rubby alcohol.
Like I said, when I was smelling it, as a medicinal aspect to it, definitely, for sure.
So, fun fact, while I was researching the bourbon in general and talking about how during Prohibition, a lot of distilleries went under. So in Kentucky specifically, so there's a very interesting thing where bourbon wasn't produced in Kentucky for 95 years. It's only recently, within the last 20 years, that it's been produced in Bourbon, Kentucky, specifically. Not Kentucky, but Bourbon, Kentucky. So there's a lot of brands out now that are saying they're a Bourbon, Kentucky brand or distilled there and that sort of thing. And during Prohibition, almost all of those distilleries went out of business and went out. And the only things that were left were medicinal whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I thought was just an absolutely crazy concept. Medicinal. I mean, I think all whiskey is medicinal.
I certainly treat it as medicine.
But I thought that was a really interesting point.
It cures what ails me.
Yes, it does.
Which is life.
Yeah, well, life is killing me every day.
And you know what? A lot of those, if you can find stuff like medicinal whiskey that was produced during Prohibition, that shit's crazy. Like, expensive. A lot of it was really aged, too. It's not unheard of to see something back then that was aged 18 years and released like that as a medicinal one.
So probably what they were doing is they're taking their old reserves of whiskey that was just regular whiskey and then just labeling it medicinal. Yeah,
and some of it wasn't labeled as that either. And then to get it back then, you had to get a prescription from a doctor, which is crazy.
Yeah, but is that like going to California and getting a prescription to pot?
I think it kind of was, but not at the same level. Because I think if it were like that, a lot of the distilleries that did go under might not have.
Sure. I think there's a lot of
if those prescriptions were flowing, the good times would be going.
Good times would be rolling. All right, so that's the end of my piece. You know, I was really happy to get into some more details and things that I didn't know. I certainly was enlightened. So,
I mean, this is booze. It's crazy how much story and history goes into all this too.
Yeah, it's nuts. And I didn't realize that bourbon, the distinction of bourbon, is actually considered a truly American distinct product from regular whiskey.
Yes.
So it is very, there's some specificity.
Bourbon's
to it.
more American than apple pie.
Absolutely, because apple pie is not American at all.
No.
Yeah, that's a. You know that chop suey is as American as apple pie?
Or from what I've heard, and is highly, it's a heated argument, like pizza or tacos.
Yeah, I would say that we take any regional dish, and then like cashew chicken is actually a completely American invention. And so there's a very interesting documentary on Netflix actually about Chinese food and how it came to be and its prevalence and the different flavors. So chop suey is actually a completely American product, and it was created to suit the palates of American tastes.
Oh, when I was younger, working in a Chinese restaurant, yes, it's highly apparent. The stuff they make during the day to sell to the masses is much different than what gets made at night.
Yeah,
when
themselves.
The cooks are all eating.
Yeah.
And they leave me out of it to just stare at this magnificent food and never get a chance to have any of it.
So the funny thing is I also worked in a Chinese restaurant when I was a teenager, but they would always make me food. It was owned by a couple, and they said I was such a hard worker, so they'd always offer me food as like a little extra like bonus in life.
Yeah, I always got fed too, but it was off the other menu, not the cool one.
Oh, I gotcha. No, they made stuff just for me. And they had a really good sense of humor. Like, they taught me there's a secret Chinese way of heating rice. And it blew my fucking mind.
Why did they make me make the rice all the time?
So what they did is they had rice, fried rice, or regular rice. And I said, Eric, come here. We're going to show you. And I'm not going to do a Chinese accent because I'm not going to do it.
We're not going to do that.
We're not going to go there. But anyways, so it's like the secret is you add a teaspoon of water to the rice, and then you put it in the microwave and reheat it. That's the ancient Chinese secret to reheating rice. And I just like
put that on a package.
And that's the joke that was told to me from them. It was I died. Like I heard that shit and I'm like, holy fuck.
Just as an observation from making rice myself, sometimes it is better the next day after you reheat it in the microwave. And you do add a little bit of water to it.
Exactly, because it re-steams and rehydrates the rice. It's brilliant. That's the true thing. All right. Anyways, I'm done with my piece. On to you.
Oh, it's tough to come off of that.
I know,
Just
man.
like talking about the booze so much. So what I wanted to talk about today was going into retro gaming, so like older systems going back many years, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis,
Atari,
all the others. I really don't fuck with anything before 8-bit.
Fair enough.
I won't really talk about that. But, I just wanted to talk about it in general as a thing. I felt maybe earlier when we first did our episode, we should have introduced ourselves and our interests, the things that we were really into. And one of the things that over the years consistently I have really been into for the majority of my life are video games.
Yep.
And
I will say, you and I are both interested in video games, but we take two different, I think we're different spectrums. So you get into your thing.
Yeah, and then I was going to shoot, something like that off you. So when I got into it as a kid, I had a Nintendo, regular NES. The weird thing is that my brother and I got one for Christmas. We never asked for it. Like, it wasn't something that we were really after. Growing up, like, other kids in the neighborhood had them. We'd check it out, play with it, be like, oh, okay, this is interesting. But, like, never asked for it, just ended up getting it one Christmas. And it was just like, whoa, this is crazy. I didn't ask for it, we got it. So had the Nintendo. Again, with the other kids in the neighborhood, we're trading games, we're borrowing stuff from each other, playing it, and, like, it's cool, but it wasn't something that, like, I'm totally into this, something like that, and, I just kind of didn't think about it for a while, and the thing that I would say that truly got me into video gaming, the thing that really hooked me, is... One year I was down at my grandma's hanging out. My grandma lived in Red Wing, Minnesota, which is a very dead and boring place if you've ever been there.
Hey, but you know what? St. James Hotel? Fucking baller.
So, I was at the St. James Hotel. Seriously, I was at the St. James Hotel, historical place in Red Wing. True story. I was at the St. James Hotel with my brother. We were just in, like, the downtown, quote-unquote, Red Wing area, mulling around while our grandma was finishing up something. Decided to go in there because they had a bookstore on the first level. We went in there, and I don't know, I had, like, $5 to spend, didn't know what I wanted, just happened to glance at their magazine section, looked through, and I found an issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly.
Wow.
Okay, so I pick up this magazine, which is like as thick as a city phone book. Like, this thing was packed full of pages. I believe it was issue number 62. On the cover, it had featured Sonic CD, which had just come out on the Sega CD. Had that, I looked at it. For some reason, this thing caught my eye. I was like, well, I played Nintendo. This is kind of interesting. Maybe I'll get this and I'll see what's going on right now because, I'm seeing all the commercials. Other kids at school are talking about these things. They have them. I buy this magazine. I open it up. It's in a plastic bag. It's sealed. So when I leave,
it's porn for kids.
Yeah. So it's proofed, and there's all kinds of other shit in there. It's in a plastic bag. I get out of there, and I finally open up, and I look into this thing, and I am exposed to a completely different world. So far beyond my imagination that I have no idea how to absorb all this information that is pouring into my eye holes from this magazine. There's all these systems that I've never heard of before. There's, we've got... stuff from overseas. It featured games from Japan, and I'm like, there's video games in Japan?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy because this is where everything is coming from.
So to pause there for a moment, Sega CD, that's actually, when did that come out? That was 93-ish, 94? No.
It's before that.
Because I thought regular Genesis was still going strong in like 93.
Oh, and it definitely was. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to put the...
games released on the Genesis through 95.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Super Nintendo. But the Sega CD, the 32X had come out as well. Both of them sort of failed ventures into that. It didn't quite catch on. But where was I going there with that?
Sorry.
Oh, I remember it. Japan.
Japan.
So I see all this shit that's in Japan, and the section that covers all these new games there is massive. I'm just looking through all this stuff. Like, this is my first exposure to, like, Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z.
Damn.
Things like that. I see stuff relating to Akira, other different anime, and I, at that time I had never been exposed to that at all. So this is all new. I'm just absorbing all this, and it really opens up my eye to how incredible gaming can be.
Oh yeah.
So after I get this, I start looking into it. Usually when I get into a hobby, I'm going all out. I'm just getting right up in there.
To the elbow, at least.
I find out as much as I can. I research as much as I can. I absorb all that I can from every aspect of it. So I'm starting to learn more. Then it's like arcades. Arcades where you see the most cutting-edge technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you see all this awesome stuff. And what you do at home is nowhere
pales in
near.
Comparison.
Like, okay, you're playing
Altered Beast in the arcade versus at home.
with that, yes, the arcade version could be seen as a little bit better, but I would say they're both not very great games.
Well, nonetheless,
iconic,
absolutely,
definitely iconic.
I pumped a lot of quarters in because the nature of the game being monsters and things like that. That was my jam. I was all about that.
You turn into a werewolf or a dragon. Fuck yeah.
Yeah. So that was.
I'm a kid. I want to turn into those things because being a kid sucks.
Yeah. Turn
Not
me
really
into
being
anything.
a kid was amazing.
I feel the same way right now. Turn me into anything other than me.
I'm with you. I want to live present day Altered Beast.
Oh, that would be great. Let's make it happen.
I feel like I'm the Walking Dead right now, so I could literally rise from my grave and get out of this shit and do something else. Like, I have been welcomed to my doom for the past X amount of years that I've been alive.
All right. So, arcades, cutting edge technology.
I'm finding out more. I'm into arcades. I'm experiencing all of it. Like, I still have Nintendo. And for... I don't know if it's many years, but for years I would bug my parents like, I really want a Sega Genesis. I really want a Super Nintendo. And like, unlike getting the Nintendo after not asking for it, at that point it's just like, no, we don't want to get you that stuff. So then came the thing of me having to acquire stuff with my own money. So I saved up enough money, got a Super Nintendo.
That's you had to save some bucks because I remember
I was a kid. I wasn't getting any money for doing anything. I wasn't doing odd jobs. So
did it take you 10 years, childhood years, to like get that?
It took me a while. From what I remember, it'd be like money that I would get from my birthday or Christmas, and then I think one year my dad got me a jacket. And at this time, my parents had been divorced, so like I didn't see my dad very much. He got me a jacket that like did not fit even close. Like it was way too small for me. And he had a gift receipt in there, and he's like, "Well, you can do whatever you want with it. I don't care," because he put his effort into it and tried.
Yeah.
And I used some of that money to then get my Super Nintendo, which was like the greatest moment of my life. But also a questionable moment in my life, too, because it was like, did I make the right decision by going with Super Nintendo? Or should I have got the Sega Genesis? Like, this was the heaviest decision.
You were burdened.
I had to make in my life up until that point. And now I even still think about it to this day.
See, I made my decision, and I still feel good about my decision at the same time.
Well, I definitely feel good about it, too.
Okay. So
I do that. I get my Super Nintendo, and then it's like, yes, this is the greatest day of my life. I got this shit. I remember seeing Super Mario World for the first time and being blown away because really that game was a technical showcase at the time over what was on the regular Nintendo. Like Super Mario Brothers 3, that's like, wow, there's like almost weird curves in all the backgrounds instead of everything being at complete right angles. And in this game, Super Mario World, taking it to the nth degree and seeing all this crazy shit, which was a good thing that I have a hair in my mouth, which is a good thing that I liked it because that was the only game I had to play for over a year.
Holy shit. Yeah, I remember. Because
I didn't have any money, I couldn't buy my own games, and my parents didn't want to buy me any games.
Yeah, they're like, that's a bad habit. Like, they don't want to subsidize your bad habit, basically.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So, do you remember, is it what's the game with the kid from Boy Meets World, and it's about video games? Where he's got that autistic brother, or that's what in today's terms, you would know that he's autistic, and they play, like, the big things to go to the competition to play Super Mario 3.
Oh, Wizard?
The Wizard, yes!
Yeah.
I remember...
It was like you saw Super Mario Brothers 3 for the first time in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is this? And the Power Glove is so bad.
Yeah.
Never had a Power Glove. I did have a U-Force.
Oh.
Which my dad got me, interestingly enough. And the U-Force was supposed to be sort of like a motion control type thing. It looked like, how you set up Battleship when you're playing. You've got your flat end and it folds up like a laptop.
Yeah.
Well, basically in that, like, wherever you hovered your hands in the area around this thing, it was supposed to do, some control inputs.
That's how I thought women worked when I first started. Like,
you just put your hands around them somewhere.
Yeah, around them.
Turn into a human windmill and just...
Yeah. Like, is this doing it? Does this feel good? You're not touching me. But this is how I do it, right? No, you're not touching me. But, like, how about this now?
With how the U-Force worked, it was even worse than doing something like that.
Oh, wow.
You had no idea what the fuck was going on or what was going to happen. It was a really, really terrible peripheral add-on for that
sounds
system.
Amazing, honestly. Like, just, there's some electronics. Let's plug it in. It inputs to something. What does it do? We're not sure.
Something might happen. And then it had this weird, like, if you didn't want to do that, it had this weird, like, fork-shaped handle that you could plug into it to try and do it. And it had, like, a little button on top of the handles. That thing got thrown away real quick, I believe.
Dude, useless peripherals could be an episode all its own.
It could be. I mean, there's so many of them out there. The Sega Activator.
Jesus Christ.
That thing, I mean, going off of motion control again, too. Advertising that to people playing fighting games, that would be the most frustrating thing to use ever.
Yes.
Like, no one would purposely want to use that. People go out of their way to use a fishing controller for the Dreamcast to play, like, Soul Calibur. They can do it with that.
Yeah.
Like, that's possible, but you couldn't do it with the Activator, no.
I mean, what people invest their time into doing, I think someone beat Dark Souls with, like, a Dance Dance Revolution pad.
Or like, somebody beat it with a controller completely covered in, like, Vaseline. Just to make...
What?
Like, some of the things that the lengths that people go to just to really fucking beat a game is amazing.
I have no ambition to beat a game in a really obscure way to be internet famous, maybe? I'm not really sure.
Or even just doing, like, speed runs just to do a speed run. I'm not about that. I'm trying to enjoy myself. I don't want to go too fast.
That's what I say with ladies, it's my philosophy there.
No speed runs.
No speed runs. Hey, listen, ladies, no speed runs.
I mean, unless you're told to.
Right.
That's a little different.
That's a little different. But just know that if we're doing a speed run, it's going to be quick.
Speed run.
Speed run. Like, it's not lasting for a half an hour. You got 3 minutes at most if we're doing a
half an hour. That's a speed run.
Okay, so Japanese arcade games. You got into it. You're seeing the whole.
Yeah, I get my Super Nintendo. I have one game to play for over a year. It's miserable.
And I feel that that's a very common theme, certainly with myself. You have your system. It's an amazing achievement just to get the thing. It's amazing. And you have one game for a year. That's what you got. In a year, you got the one game. So I definitely relate to that struggle.
If it would have been any other game than Super Mario World, it probably would have just fucking killed myself. Luckily, that's a big game with a lot of things to do and a lot of secrets. So, thankfully, that held me over. And I started buying my own games. So that was good. The first game that I bought with my own money, I still have. It's complete. It's mint. I have box instructions, everything that comes with it. Because, being someone who had to buy things myself, your outlook on that is a bit different. Like, I have to take care of this thing. This is super special. I got this with my own money. So that stuck with me all this time. I always keep everything in good condition. Finally, my parents start warming up to it, and they start getting me games.
They're like, oh, that's just Kyle, and he likes his video games.
I mean, they begrudgingly do it.
Yep.
And make it apparent. They're like, all right, here you go. I don't want to give this to you at all.
You should be outside playing with friends and interacting with people, but I guess.
Oh, and I did that plenty, too. So it's not like I was spending all my time doing that. So I get into that. I get more heavily into it. I start going. I'm going to the arcades. I'm playing games like Samurai Showdown 2. Like this whole new world of violent fighting games.
Yeah.
Street Fighter 2, Samurai Showdown 2, Mortal Kombat, all this stuff's coming out, and it's really getting me going. I'm real excited about it. In school, we start having discussions, like doing current events, and we're talking about violent video games, and I'm getting really pumped and into it and joining the discussions because I actually care what we're talking about instead of other garbage. And I mean, it's just a thing that progressed and progressed and progressed, and now that I'm an adult, I've been able to do things that I've really wanted to do. Like, the crowning achievement, I feel, of, like, my enthusiasm as a gamer was, in 1999, I got a Neo Geo. And now when the Neo Geo came out, it was this mythical, ultra expensive, like, boutique system that played actual arcade games. Like, what you play in the arcade is going to be the same thing as what you play at home. There's going to be no difference in graphics. There's no difference in gameplay. There's no difference in sound. You even have big-ass arcade-style controllers that come with it, too. And, like, when the Neo Geo came out, I mean, you could get two versions in America. There was the gold system, which was the actual system itself and two controllers, or a silver setup, where it's just the system and one controller. And I can't remember exactly what the price point was, but it's like somewhere around $750 for either one of them. I'm not sure which one, but it's just like, this is unobtainable stuff for any child to get. Like, this is grown man playground stuff right here. And even then, that's a hell of a jump to get into gaming.
Well, and think about $700 then is a lot more money in today's value.
Yes.
So you're looking at like over $1,000 for a system.
Yeah.
If you were to compare it for inflation.
And we're talking about tough times for a kid to get a Super Nintendo game. It's like 50, 60
Neo
bucks.
Geo.
Neo Geo games.
Forget about it.
Yeah, like from when it first came out, $175 to the end of its life cycle in 2005, 1990 to 2005, somewhere like $175 to ending at like $325 per game. And what's funny is the biggest difference, really the only difference between the games for the arcade, because it used like a motherboard and cartridge setup in the arcade, the Neo Geo MVS multi-video system, and the home system, the Neo Geo AES Advanced Entertainment System, was the size of the edge connectors on the bottom of the cartridge were different. So you couldn't buy the quote-unquote cheaper home version of the game and put it into the arcade motherboard. Which is funny because you think about it like, this is a lot of fucking money, but when the arcade versions come out, they're around $1,000.
Hot damn.
But it's like you buy these things and you expect to make money off of them.
Yes.
So 1999, I get a Neo Geo. And this is like the greatest thing ever because for 9 years, there is this mythical system that came out that you could not get. Like, up until that point, the closest that I'd ever seen for it was a box behind a glass case in a Toys R Us where you had to grab the little card off the shelf and bring it to a special hole in the wall where the person would hand you.
And you had to have a special handshake and like a password to be able to purchase it.
But they set it up so no one could steal the shit. So here's my little card, this is what I want to buy, then you would pay for it and then you'd get it. And that'd be the only way I'd see it. And then you'd see crazy stuff too, like, what is TurboGrafx 16?
Yeah.
Like, what is the Philips CDI?
Yeah, all those. You know, for myself, I definitely, like, I stuck with mainstream systems. I definitely could not afford, I could only dream of these other things. And I did Electronics Gaming Monthly. I did a lot of these magazines. So I definitely
that magazine was tight back in the day.
Was the thing. If you want to know anything, because pre-internet, how were you going to gain any of that information?
That was that. And how did these people who wrote these magazines get this information?
I don't know. It's crazy. So you would covet that shit. And I remember when the Sega CD came out, like, or the Sega Saturn, or the Atari Jaguar.
Oh, yeah.
So when the Jaguar came out...
I wanted a Jaguar bad.
So bad. Because Alien vs. Predator was on.
Alien vs. Predator, for sure.
Holy shit. Everything...
Cybermorph.
Everything in my life coalesced when Alien vs. Predator came out. Loving aliens, loving Predator, loving video games, and then there was a system that created that. And when you saw, like, in the magazines, those stills, you're like, this is the literal greatest thing I've ever seen in my life.
This is everything I want in one thing.
I went to a campgrounds, and the owner of the campground's kid had one, and they were playing Alien vs. Predator. And I didn't give a shit about anything else in life. I just wanted to sneak in and watch this kid play Alien vs. Predator when it came out. Like, I was so envious of this kid. It's fucking bullshit that I have to be in a camper camping with my parents when this fucking guy...
This is all I want to do right here.
This is all I want to do. And I got to deal with this bullshit, and I want to play Alien vs. Predator. And the concept, just the idea that you could choose Alien, Predator, Human, like, what?
It was really good.
It was
really
mind-blowing. In hindsight, looking at it now,
it hasn't aged well.
No. But when it came out, again, because I'm trying to think of the systems that were out. Like, I think it was still in the Sega Genesis era.
It was in the weird transition zone. Like, here are, like, you got the Sega CD is like the main disc-based system. You've got NEC's TurboGrafx system, which you could get a CD add-on for, or buy the Turbo Duo, which is the consolidated version of both systems in one thing. I think like the PlayStation had just come out, and the Saturn maybe just about came out. The Saturn beat the PlayStation. So it was like right when they first came out, but between that, it was in the weird transition zone, but it was touting itself as a 64-bit system.
And that was some shady shit behind that, because it wasn't...
It was like two 32-bit processors, and
right.
It was, apparently the system was a nightmare to program for.
You're right. I do remember watching a video on it, and it was deceptive as far as like what it could actually do. And the games... It was so impossible to program for that no one could actually fully implement the full processing power of that system. So the games looked like shit, really, ultimately.
And then they had the CD add-on, which failed before it even started. It looked like a toilet when you put the CD add-on into it. It literally looked like a toilet. And the funny thing is like the mold for the actual system itself got sold to some like dentist equipment. Like the company makes dentistry tools, and they use the housing for the Jaguar as one of their products.
That is, my mind is blown and kind of shattered.
Like, what if you were at the dentist and you looked over and saw this thing and was like, why is this Atari Jaguar cleaning my teeth? I mean, why wouldn't it be? This is awesome.
The Atari Jaguar cleans teeth? Since when? Yes, please. I will go to that dentist on a somewhat regular basis, other than once every 10 years.
So it failed. Really, the only game on that system that's aged somewhat well is Tempest 2000, which is a really fucking good game. Too good to be on that system, honestly.
But one game for an entire console.
Yeah. Still want it. I would still get a Jaguar to this day if I got offered a good thing, which... Crazily enough, the prices for Jaguar stuff is through the roof, which is something I'll touch on later in the conversation. Going back to it, I get a Neo Geo. And I get a Neo Geo because I got a Neo Geo Pocket Color. So it was Neo Geo's handheld system, which at the time was competing against the Game Boy Color.
Okay.
And so Game Boy Color, that's like 8-bit. It's your standard Game Boy, just with color palette added into it. Then comes along the Neo Geo Pocket. So this is 16-bit. It's got a little bit better graphics. Gameplay on it's awesome. It has the best D-pad To this date, that system had the best D-pad of any controller I've ever experienced. It's real clicky, like you just have to use it to experience it. So when I get this Neo Geo Pocket Color, I just have this moment of clarity. I stop what I'm doing because it's all these awesome SNK games. SNK made the Neo Geo. That was the company. You're playing all these awesome games that were released on that, but you're playing like a quote-unquote pocket version of it. And I just stopped playing one day and I was like, what the fuck? I got this. This is reminding me of all these things I've ever wanted. I want to get a Neo Geo. I will go down this road and achieve what I've always wanted to. I had a job. I was making money. I mean, a lot like right now. I can't save up any money. So I had asked a coworker to help me out and borrow me some money so I could get this thing after I had this wild idea all of a sudden shoot in my head. I end up purchasing it from the most notoriously bad mail order video game store at the time. So this place, Buy Right Video Games, now has been known as a place of nothing but like nightmare experiences for people, which it was a nightmare experience for me. So at the time, I tried hunting down a system. I had even gone so far as to calling SNK directly themselves. And SNK USA was run basically by a family, the Barones. And I had actually ended up talking to about half of them when I did call. So I got, moved around, like, okay, we'll transfer you over to one section, we'll transfer you over to the other. At the time, they didn't have any systems. They had a CD version, but nobody wanted a Neo Geo CD because of its horrendously long loading times. So discouraged, but still feeling pumped up because I talked to all these people, my hunt continues. And I end up seeing in the back of one of the magazines, mini magazines I got, it was probably Game Fan, see the advertisement for Buy Right Video Games. And they have this thing. It's like, get a Neo Geo, 2 controllers, 2 games.
Holy shit.
King of Fighters 98, which had just come out.
Was it 1997?
No, it was 1999 because all the year-dated King of Fighters games were back a year from whatever it was.
Mm-hmm. That was kind of what I was hinting at. Is that they always seem to be off a year from when they actually.
Yeah, it wasn't like cars where they're skipping ahead.
Right.
It was behind. So it would come with King of Fighters 98, which just came out, and Metal Slug X, which had come out a few months before.
Wow. Okay. Yep.
So, and the price on this was $999.99.
Holy shit.
So that's, if you think about
$1 billion.
That is a lot of money. And I'm working at a job where I'm making like $100 in 2 weeks.
Right.
And I can't save shit. So I hit up one of my buddies I work with, and I'm like, hey, can I borrow some money? And amazingly enough, he was all for it. He was just like, yeah, man, I'll borrow you the money. I would have never borrowed myself that much money. I paid him back as soon as I could, and I did that, but, like...
You're a stand-up guy, so obviously you paid him back.
It's sort of a scumbag, but not that kind of scumbag who wouldn't pay back a friend.
Right. You would propose borrowing whatever you needed to make up the difference of what you had to do $1,000, but you paid him back.
Plus, I saw him almost every day at school and at work, so there's that, too.
There's that.
So I get the money from him, call up the place, set up the deal, like, okay, I got to send money orders for this thing and do that. And when we set up the transaction, I'm like, I am paying this much money for it. I want overnight shipping because I cannot fucking wait to get this thing because this is some shit that I've been waiting for almost 10 years of my life.
I would imagine the excitement level for you is like through the fucking roof.
It was incredible. Like, since then, I have never felt the excitement that I did when this was going on. Like, I'm dead inside now. I feel nothing. But back then, there was like a glimmer of hope. There was something out there. There was a material thing that I could give legal tender to that would make me happy.
That would fulfill your life in that moment for whatever period of time. Okay, guys.
So I set it up at work. I work at a grocery store. We do money orders at work. I get the money orders taken care of at work. It's so much that I have to break it up into 3 different money orders.
Holy
because
shit.
I could only go up to $500 per each one.
Damn.
Plus, like, whatever the shipping was for overnight.
Right, because it's going to be an additional $500 for overnight shipping.
And I overnight the payment as well, so they get it as fast as possible, and it's tracked, and I know about all that. Do that. Wait a couple days, nothing. Wait a week, I see nothing. Call them up. Oh, yeah, we just been behind. We'll get it out to you. Wait a little bit more. Wait another week. Nothing. Call them up again. Be like, I paid for overnight shipping. What is this? I still haven't seen anything yet. More excuses. What it takes. 4 months.
Holy fuck.
Of waiting.
Really? And
then I finally get something in the mail after 4 months of just constantly calling.
Was it a thank you card?
No. No, it wasn't.
Good.
It was nothing like that. So 4 months later, I finally get this fucking thing. I tear into the box. What I see kind of makes my heart sink a little bit. I get a system that's not in a box. And I only get 1 controller, and I was supposed to get 2. So it said, box system, this, that, and the other thing. So I do get a US system. I look on it. And Buy Right Video Games is known for putting these little holographic stickers on it. Kind of like you'd see at a rental store where if you pull it off, it leaves behind shit.
Yep.
So it's like void. Well, this sticker is strategically placed over a chunk missing on one of the corners on my system. So it's right around that. I feel I could put my finger through it. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I have 1 controller, and I get the games. I do get the games that were advertised. I get King of Fighters 98. And I get Metal Slug X. King of Fighters 98 is a Japanese version. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? I live in America. Why am I not getting that? This is what was advertised. That's what I expect. Hindsight, it didn't really matter because after that, I went all Japanese with all my Neo Geo games. But it was just weird. I get a US version of Metal Slug X, which now, if I would have kept it, would be worth all the money in the world.
Isn't that kind of the thing? If I look back at it, everything that I've sold or traded in, I hit myself, and I hate myself a little bit inside because if I would have kept it, it would have been worth so much more.
Yeah, and that's something that I'll get into when I finally get to the current state of retro gaming, the prices and all that. Mm-hmm. It's just, So anyways, I get these things, I fire this shit up. Holy fucking shit.
Mind blown.
My mind is blown. These 2D graphics are so fucking good. I own this crazy shit. I was this is it right here.
So my question to you is, do you still own the original Neo Geo console that you bought? I
don't. I have a different one.
Okay. That's what I thought.
I've gone through a couple because, I could do multiple episodes on just the Neo Geo alone. There's all kinds of different aspects. In America, it had a really shitty video output, to be honest. And then there was a whole thing about people modifying it for different video outputs. And certain serial numbered systems did better with certain modifications. You'd get better results.
Interesting. So you modifications as far as upgrading sound or upgrading video?
Both upgrading sound and video, because on the Neo Geo, it would output from its main AV out monaural sound, and it had a headphone jack on the front, and you get stereo out of that. So people would modify it to put out stereo sound through the regular AV, and here it had either composite, so the yellow colored plug, or RF. Those are what you could get in America. And that would be as good as it gets. And honestly, the composite quality wasn't all that great on some of the systems. It was okay on some of them, but not that great. A lot of people would modify it so it could do S video, and then later on they would change it so it could do component video. And then now there's a thing where you could have it do like HDMI or VGA, but really the best video output you could get for most video game systems up through the PS2 is RGB.
Yep.
Now, RGB, not to be confused with component video, which uses a red, green, and blue cable.
Right.
It's not the same thing. RGB video is a standard that was used in both Europe and Japan. Never really implemented here. Really, the only time you would see that implemented in America is with on professional broadcasting things or medical equipment. And there are a few like professional monitors, like TVs basically, that you can get that will accept that kind of input. And so it's a whole mess.
What's interesting about formats is that, so I used to work on radio, and radio, the formats that we'd use for radio were totally different than what you would buy as a consumer. So when I worked on radio, we used mini discs.
Yeah, I had a mini disc player.
Yeah, I still have one. I still own it. I never got rid of it. So we would use mini discs for our main format. And so what you would do in a lot of like broadcasting formats is totally different than what you would use as a consumer. And so I think that's a very interesting difference of like what you use professionally versus what people use at home.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways.
Why this was never implemented in America, I have no idea, because a true RGB signal from any of the older systems is the greatest shit you will ever see. So crisp, so clean. But then again, there's a lot of people out there like, ooh, I like video games because, you know, things look shitty and it has a retro look to it. I don't adhere to that kind of thing. I like my shit looking real sharp.
Real sharp. So you're saying RGB.
Best video format. My search for the perfect picture quality ended when I was able to make use of RGB. But I digress with the Neo Geo thing. I mean, that opens up new doors for me. I start seeing more things. I have an actual job, a full-time job where I'm making money, so I am, like, quote-unquote an adult, and I can buy the things that I want. I get more into importing stuff from Japan, playing Japanese stuff. I get more of the obscure-ish systems.
Yep.
TurboGrafx 16 here, or PC Engine as it's called in Japan. I get more into that. Dreamcast is coming out. I'm getting stuff for that. PS2 comes out. I'm going full force, ass, mouth, and vagina, and all of these things. Like, I'm really getting into it. And then finally, it like reaches its apex, and I finally start buying arcade stuff. Like, I'm getting arcade hardware. This is where it's at. The thing that really did it for me is a friend of mine went to Japan for school, and he was like in the arcades in Japan, which are legendary. It's the thing that dreams are made of for a person like me.
Just seeing videos of it or documentaries that mention the arcades of Japan, it really is absolutely mind-boggling. So for me, growing up, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, or kids that are born in the 90s and beyond, is there's a thing called an arcade. And you would go, and each thing you would go to is its own distinct thing, its own game, its own experience. And if you wanted to experience a certain, like a fighting game or a shooter or whatever it was, you'd go to this thing and you'd experience it, and you'd pump a bunch of quarters into it.
Yes.
And you would spend half of your day, all of your allowance, in an arcade.
Like, the arcade experience is something that, unfortunately, a lot of people can't experience.
And as a child, an arcade experience is really unforgettable. We had one arcade in a far-off town for me. So you'd go there, and you would spend... And, of course, it's always like you're there with your family. You want to spend all day there, and you only get a limited amount of time. And again, so that's where I experienced Mortal Kombat.
Oh, man, Mortal Kombat, seeing that in the arcade for the first time. Like, I almost felt bad, like, thinking about it in the car on the way over here, I was like, okay, this is going to be a generalization. I'm not going to go in and talk about the social impact of Mortal Kombat on society and that kind of thing.
Well, you certainly can.
And I certainly can in the future, but it's just like, there
was a huge difference between... So what I remember is playing a Mortal Kombat 2 in arcade versus the Sega Genesis. So I had a Sega Genesis. Mm-hmm. It was a huge difference. You wanted to go, if you wanted the best quality graphics experience, you would play it arcade.
At the arcade.
And that was the thing, is like, it's kind of like versus, like right now, maybe the best way to describe it is a PlayStation versus a PlayStation, or PS4 versus PS Pro. Regular PlayStation 4, great. But if you want that extra bit of finish...
Oh, I would say it's way more than that. Back then, the difference, it would be like PlayStation 1 versus PlayStation 4. The arcade is PlayStation 4, and you're playing PlayStation 1 version of these games at home.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of close, and if you squint and you try real hard, you can feel like you're playing it, but the only way to truly experience how fucking awesome it was, you had to be at the arcade.
And what's interesting is, it's just that whole experience of being in arcades. And what I liked about it was, when you're in an arcade, you're with other people that really enjoyed the same thing you did.
Yeah.
And they're there for the same experience. And they both understood, hey, I have Mortal Kombat 2 at home, but the only way they could really experience it is in some random back alley, mini golf course place that has an arcade that has Mortal Kombat 2. I would personally love to have a Mortal Kombat 2 arcade setup. That would be amazing to me.
And you know what? That's exactly what I thought. So my friend gets back from Japan. He tells me about this game that he played out there in the arcade. He buys one. He brings it over to a friend's house who has a device that lets you play arcade games on a regular TV. Now this device, I don't know how it got its name. There's many different styles of them, but it's called a super gun. And a super gun is what you use to play arcade games on a TV if you don't have the large cabinet setup.
Right.
I see maybe 2 minutes of this, and I go, I am buying this. I'm getting it. I go on the internet, I find a place that sells it, boom, I buy it. Total downhill from there. I'm getting arcade games like crazy. I'm reliving the experience. One of the greatest impacts for gaming on me when I was a kid was seeing Samurai Shodown 2 in the arcade. I would go to this place, I would play it, be like, this is fucking amazing. It felt at the time so ahead of its time. So much different than Street Fighter 2, which was out at the time.
Right.
So much different from that, because here you are, you're samurai or other characters fighting with swords. There's blood. You kill the other person. It's in a classy way. It's not over-the-top Mortal Kombat style, but in a very artistic package. Graphics, sound, traditional Japanese music is playing in this game. It's crazy.
Holy shit. It's a totally different experience in life.
Yeah. So I play that. My mind is blown. I look up. There is a port of Samurai Shodown 1 on the Super Nintendo. And I'm like, this game in the arcade is so tight. I have to go pick this up. I pick up the game. It's kind of a disappointment in comparison.
As it is.
So it's a bad port. The graphics aren't as good. The gameplay is not as good. It's a pale shadow of that. I deal with it. Fast forward to when I get a Neo Geo. Bam, I get Samurai Shodown 2. That doesn't satisfy me. Bam, I get Samurai Shodown 2 for the arcade. I have that running in an arcade machine. Last night and the night before, I actually fired that shit up in my cabinets that I have at home, and I was playing that. And it's just I'm reliving these memories.
So the thing is, you and I have never done that together. We have never experienced any of your arcade games fought against each other and anything like that ever. We've never made a night of that.
Right, yeah. It's weird. people will come to my place and they'll see these machines and they'll be like, what are these things?
What is this thing that's taking up 65% of your living room?
Most of my living room is being taken up by my arcade cabinets that I have and like my collection of games. A lot of people just want to know what it is, and then they don't want to see it any further. They're like, oh okay. I mean, it's weird. I don't know.
I am very fascinated to find out more because especially arcade video games, are something that interests me. There's a nostalgia factor. Now, I don't have cabs. That's an investment. You've chosen to go down a road and to pursue a passion that requires time, energy, and money.
And skill, too, because a lot of work that you have to do on these things, you have to know what you're doing, whether it be electrical, mechanical, or whatever.
The maintenance to keep these things up and running, just the stories that you've told me as far as replacing batteries and trying to save saves and buy out all those, there is skill involved in it, and you're a skilled person as far as...
I am a skilled person, not by choice, but out of necessity.
Right. People seek you out because of your skill.
They do. I repair or modify a lot of older video game stuff. And the reason I got into it is because there just aren't a lot of people out there who do it. Mm-hmm. And I needed to get stuff done. The worst thing that happened to me with that is I had a particular game. The game was Pro Gear. And it was on Capcom's CPS2 hardware. And basically this hardware in it has a battery. And if this battery dies, it wipes all the memory of the game that are on the chips in it. It has a suicide battery is literally what it's called. So I have this game. It is said that the batteries are supposed to last about 5 years. The game was older than that when I had it. I wanted to send it to someone to change the battery in it. This guy ended up having the game for over 6 months before he did anything to it, and the whole time, I'm just freaking out like, what if the battery dies in this? This thing is dead. I mean, now people have found ways to revive games that have died. I mean, people have worked around the software and figured things out, but at the time, it was iffy. And it's just like thinking about this the whole time. This guy has this, he didn't do it, and literally, like all it takes 2 minutes to do. You just have to know how to use a soldering iron and be quick. So it's like after that experience, I was like, I got to do this myself, and I got into just finding out all the things that need to be done.
So people seek, and one of the things that I think our listeners don't understand or don't know about you is that people seek you out to do modifications on retro consoles as far as video and audio outputs and things of that nature. Like you update outputs.
Yes. So it's like I take older stuff, and then make them work with newer stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the things that I think people should understand as far as your perspective and your passions and things that a small select group of people know about you personally is that you make modifications to older systems, be it maintenance or updating outputs.
Yeah. So when I've been into this hobby, for all the years that I've been to it, at any given time there's only a handful of people who know how to do things and are willing to, sell them out. Like, you need something fixed, this is the person to do it. There's only 4 of them who do it at the time. And it always ends up being that, like, after a little bit, these 4 people who do it, they disappear and they don't do it anymore.
And that's just left with you.
And I doing it now myself, I absolutely see why. Because there are so many people who need work done. There's so many people who don't know how to do the work that they are all just like completely inundating you with requests. And I'm trying to do everything I can right now to not take on work, but so many people are hitting me up, and it's just like, I don't even really make money from doing this. It's just like I'm doing the community a favor just because of my passion for this type of thing. Like,
sure.
prevents me from saying no, and I'm doing this stuff. Like, the best example I can give is here in America, I had mentioned the system earlier. TurboGrafx-16, was a cartridge-based system. It uses a cartridge. It kind of looks like a credit card, so that's really cool in itself. This tiny thing could have a game in it. But then it had a CD add-on to it, much like the Sega CD, where you could play CD games on it. But later on, they streamlined things and released a system called the Turbo Duo. So Duo as in two things. You've got the cartridge and the CD-based system put together in one package. And at the time that came out, there is an electrical component inside called a capacitor. Basically, a capacitor stores electricity.
Yep.
And with these, they used a new style of them, what's called surface mount capacitor. And really what that is you've got a circuit board, and instead of putting two holes through it for legs coming off of these capacitors to be soldered in, it would literally mount right on the surface of a circuit board. Now, this is a new technology. I don't know if they went cheap with production or what the deal was. All these early ones that were that style, they leak the fluid that's inside of them. So the fluid that's in there is acidic. So once it starts leaking, it starts ruining shit.
Right.
Every single Turbo Duo that was released in America has this problem. All of them have leaking caps, and if all of them go, caps short for capacitor, and if they go, and if they're left too long, they will destroy all the little, what's called traces, the metal legs, and basically paths for the electricity to go through. It'll eat them up and ruin it, and then it won't work anymore. So all of them need to be replaced. All of them.
Every single one.
I have done so many of them. It's just driving me nuts.
So how many have you... So what I want to know is, do you basically charge just to do the replacement cost of the capacitors, or do you actually charge for time invested into the thing?
I really should be charging for the time that it takes me to do, because if I charged hourly, would I make it work?
You'd be rich.
I'd make a lot of money, but it would be prohibitively expensive for anybody to get anything done. Like, it wouldn't even be worth it at that point. So basically, I charge cost for the parts and shipping, and I just do it, and that's it.
Because it's a passion, and you want to support...
Yeah, because it's a passion. And, all these things are dying. I don't want them to die. People don't want them to die. They want to be able to enjoy the games. Of course, there are other ways to enjoy these games. You can use emulators and that kind of thing. But there's a huge chunk of people out there who want to use original hardware.
So I think it's an original point, and one of the things, when you talk to me about what you want to talk about for this episode, because the demand is so high, because what I was reading is, I've read articles about basically like people of a certain age are coming into money. They're coming into their careers, and so they have money to spend, free money to spend for the first time in their lives. And so retro gaming is really popular. And it's driving prices up of Sega Genesis, of Neo Geo, of all these things, becoming rare commodities again. So just in the same way that when you were initially a kid, the Neo Geo was the holy grail of things to grab. It's the same thing right now, because the nostalgia market, I guess, if you want to call it that, where people want to own the original hardware, they want to own the original games, they're willing to spend, they have the money for the first time in their lives to actually spend the money on...
They're looking for the next hot thing.
But the nostalgia factor.
And the nostalgia factor.
So it's not being produced anymore. So I remember being able to get a Sega Genesis for $5 at a garage sale. Now, medium price for a original Sega Genesis is $80. If you want to buy an original system, and not like the like the precursor Sega Genesis, like the regular mainline Sega, is $80. And people are willing to pay that kind of money for those systems. And thinking about what actually is involved in a Sega Genesis, there's not that much going on. And people are willing to spend $80 on an original console of just the general run-of-the-mill Sega Genesis.
Right. I mean, regular Nintendos, especially, or even the games for it, like the packet, Super Mario World. Super Mario Brothers, I'm sorry. So Super Mario Brothers, like, / Duck Hunt. You could get that for like 50 cents. I know people who would go and clear out a place of them and just like throw them out the car window as they're driving around just because.
Right. Just because.
You aren't going to get it for that price now.
There's no way in hell. So I do keep, because like myself being a person of nostalgic disposition, I suppose, I love Genesis. It's what I went from Nintendo. I went from Nintendo to Genesis. That was I didn't go Super Nintendo. I went Genesis instead. I jumped ship. I went to Japanese.
Sega does what Nintendo don't.
Right. And right now, if you're going to buy a Genesis, you're going to spend $80 minimum on a console, period. Where I remember being not that long ago, you could buy it for $5 at a flea market.
Yeah. The last one that I bought, last U.S. one that I bought, $20.
$20, easy.
And I was like, $20? Ugh.
Fine. That was super expensive. You were thinking like, oh my God, I can't believe that I would spend $20 on this fucking system.
Yeah.
And now you're like, if I bought that for $20, that would be a steal. That would be an absolute bargain. Like
this
someone
is a crime.
Yeah, right. Someone didn't realize what they had, and I am the recipient of a crime. Exactly. Like you're blowing someone over because you bought it for $20. Now it's $80. No matter where I go, and I pay attention to retro console systems and games and what people are paying for it. Like I'm just very cognizant of it because I do in my mind, like I don't have a Genesis anymore, and I had to get rid of mine. My mom forced me to get rid of my Genesis when I got a PlayStation.
The worst fate I could ever imagine.
Yeah, and I wish that my mom would have never made me like sell it. She's like, you have this, you need to get rid of it because you have this new and improved thing called the PlayStation. So.
Sad days.
Sad days. I wish I would have kept it. At least I could blame my mom for that mistake.
Whereas, this wasn't you, yes.
It wasn't
your fault.
Whereas, like, I've gotten rid of some other consoles that were definitely my fault. Like, where I thought, I'm trading in these games to these older things to get the newest thing. And my point to other people, new kids now, is don't get rid of anything.
No, don't.
Keep all of your stuff. It's worth it in the end to keep your old stuff, to have access to your old stuff.
If you have a PS3 or Xbox 360, don't get rid of that shit because eventually it's going to be unobtainable as well.
Absolutely.
Which, I mean, this goes right into the main point that I wanted to make with this. After describing, how I got into video games, I just wanted to talk about the state of retro gaming today. And the state of retro gaming today is things have gotten out of control.
Completely
in their
out
prices.
of control. Absolutely.
Like, everything is unobtainable now. For the longest time, I had held off on buying Super Nintendo games that I had wanted to get, while I was growing up. I was like, I can get it later. It's just a Super Nintendo game. It's not expensive. I have to focus on getting hundreds of dollars to buy Neo Geo games, so I'm not going to think about these Super Nintendo games that I want right now. Well, some of these Super Nintendo games right now are so fucking expensive, and it's not just Super Nintendo games. It's everything.
It's absolutely
regular NES, Genesis, Super Nintendo. I am seeing stuff
N64.
in the PS2, in Dreamcast. Games are just like stupid expensive. And it's terrible. And a lot of people talk about, there's a bubble. There will be a bubble. Eventually this bubble in retro gaming will burst and the prices will go down.
In 30 years.
I don't see that coming. I don't see it coming at all. I don't believe that there will be any bubble. The only thing that I can see is prices continually going up.
I agree with you because I suppose our generation, being that it technically is like a 20-year span, I agree with you. I don't see a bubble really popping until the next generation blows over and we're old. And I've read an article basically saying, basically people of our era are now becoming full-fledged adults, which means that we are, I suppose, independent from our parents. We are lived the life and can attain a certain amount of equity and
have
and
a
things
certain
ourselves.
amount of disposable income.
We are becoming actual adults for the first time, and nostalgia is coming over. Well, we're the second largest generation to our parents, and
that should be like baby boomer.
Baby boomer, right? So our generation, and I suppose there's a lot of arguments over lines of what the generation is, and I was reading this thing that basically, like, I would say that you and I would be the Xennials, I believe is what it's called. So we're in between Gen X and we're between millennials. We're way, way, way early for millennials. We're at the tail end of Gen X. We're right there, early 80s. It's where we're at. And it's a distinct phase when we come into being, I suppose, independent of our parents and independent of things that are directly fed to us, where we're having our own independent thoughts. And it's a different time frame from, say, millennials that were born in the late 80s or early 90s.
Or whenever. We're supposed to be from, who knows?
And that's the thing, like, demographics are really a tricky thing. So depending on who you're talking to, demographics define a millennial either from the late 70s all the way until 2000. That's a gigantic age.
That's a big chunk in time.
But then there's two distinct baby boomer generations, where there's the early baby boomers, phase one, and there's phase two of baby boomers. And I feel like at some point in time they will have that distinction of phase one and phase two, because my experience is definitely different than someone who's born in the 90s and onwards.
Right.
It's a completely different, it's an entirely different experience as far as school and worldview and access to technology versus someone that's born in 90 beyond. And I'm not really sure what my point is being with that, just the fact that I'm trying to distinguish the fact that...
Well, I think that talking about our generation, what you've been saying, the nostalgia factor, like, that is a real heavy thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like other generations of people, that's not something that really affected them. But for some reason, we got to relive this childhood thing that we were so into, and then we got to do it. But then there's the later generation that are like, ooh, I'm trying to find out what's hip. This thing was cool. I think I'm going to get into that and do that thing.
Yeah, because I remember, and I'll say that's certainly true. So remembering when the Jaguar came out, or the Sega CD, or remembering when the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis, and really actually struggling with the decision, am I going to get a Super Nintendo or am I going to get a Sega Genesis? That was a real struggle in life.
I can fucking get anything at all.
Right. I do remember, like, I had a regular Nintendo, and it was such an amazing thing to get. It blew my mind. But just so you know, I only ever had 3 games for regular Nintendo. That's it. In the entire lifespan.
What did you have?
So I had I had Mario 1,
Okay.
Mario 2, and Mario 3. That's all I ever owned for the original NES.
I mean, there could be worse things to own than that.
There could be worse, but that's my entire as far as what my parents could afford to buy me, and what I
you
could
got to
choose
be some
from.
Italian plumber, and that's it.
Right, and you had to choose, like, when it came to Christmas time or it came to those things, you really had to make a really hard decision, and it was soul tearing.
If you got Mario 3 when it came out, that's actually pretty impressive, because that shit was expensive as fuck when it came out.
I got that when it came out. That was the thing. So
I got shut down on that real hard.
So I'm sorry for you. I was not shut down. And that changed my entire... Like, that was the first video game that really... That blew my mind, that blew my perception, that really showed me more what video games can do. And, for me, in my own experience, the first console I owned was an Atari. My dad was a video game nerd very early on, and we had Pitfall, we had Pong, we had those things, and I experienced those from a very, very young person in the 80s, and then getting a Nintendo, and that being mind-boggling, and having that fucking gun, and doing Duck Hunt. That was crazy, and I remember Mario 2 being almost like a revelation versus Mario 1. Like, I thought it was such a revolutionary experience versus the first game. And then Mario 3 came out, fucking forget about it. Like, that was again, the mind was totally blown as far as what video games can do. And so it came to a real decisive struggle, which was, do you get a Super Nintendo or do you get a Sega Genesis? My brother and I decided on the Sega Genesis because we wanted Mortal Kombat. You can get that. You could get Vector Man. Sonic the Hedgehog was the thing that ultimately settled the whole debate. Sonic the Hedgehog was like, that is the thing where the future is going. We want to experience that. And we had to make that decision. It wasn't like we can have both.
If I were to describe you as like a person using a video game console, you would definitely be a Sega Genesis, because at the time that the Genesis was out, it was like touted as like the bad boy of systems.
Yeah.
It was for the alternative crowd. Like, this is for the cool hip people.
Absolutely.
And this other one is for like the nerds. And I mean, just in general, at the time that those were out, if you played video games, you were an ostracized nerd. Oh,
absolutely. Video games, like, regardless, if you played video games at the time of Sega Genesis versus Super Nintendo, you were on the outer...
You were a social outcast.
You were an outcast.
Right there.
But then you had to make a very clear distinction. Were you a Genesis or were you a Sega person? That's
the same thing.
Yeah. And you had to, like, really choose. And the things that Genesis were doing were, like... That really appealed to me, like the fast-paced...
The commercials that they were doing at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Absolutely. So I really got into Sega. I really got into Sonic the Hedgehog. I really got into Vector Man, Toe Jam and Earl. And then Mortal Kombat 3 came out for Sega Genesis. Fucking blew my mind as far as...
3 came out on a cartridge system? I
It
thought
did.
It wasn't until like PlayStation... Saturn that it came out.
Nope. So Mortal Kombat 3 came out on the Sega Genesis.
I might be thinking of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, maybe.
Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 also came out on Sega Genesis. That's what came out, and that blew my. You can look it up. You can do that.
I gotta fact check this.
Fact check it, because I had Mortal Kombat 3 on Sega Genesis, and I played it obsessively. Like, when that game came out, it was all that I could think of. Nothing else mattered in my life.
Because, I mean, definitely when the first Mortal Kombat came out, the Genesis version was the one to get because you had the blood code. On the Super Nintendo, you got the white sweat And it wasn't until Mortal Kombat 2 came out for both systems that you were getting blood and violence on both of them. And on that one, I definitely have to say that Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo was the superior version. Although going back to it now, it's kind of rough. Maybe the 32X version would be a little bit better. So let's wrangle this back.
Wrangle it back. So
onto what I really wanted, the main point that I wanted to make out of all of this at the end, after talking about how I got into it and, how gaming has affected me and, kind of molded me into the person that I am with my interests. The state of retro gaming now, if you want to get into it, basically don't.
Yeah, don't do it.
Because the prices are just absolutely prohibitive. Mm-hmm. They just keep going up and up and up. Really all that needs to happen for this kind of sensational activity to happen is for, YouTubers out there like Angry Video Game Nerd or the Let's Play series. All they have to do is do a show on a game, and you can see overnight prices just skyrocket on a single game. So it's insane. You have to be a very rich person if you want to get into it now. Like me, myself, I haven't bought an older game for quite a few years just because I can't. And going back to what I was saying earlier, when I was getting Neo Geo stuff, I'd be like, oh, I won't get anything for Super Nintendo because it's Super Nintendo and it'll always be cheap. Well,
guess what? It's not.
That didn't happen. And I had mentioned, people thinking that there's going to be eventually some kind of bubble. A while back, maybe it was 2006, 2007, there was a slight hiccup in prices because at that time I had made the decision, I'm going to sell my Neo Geo stuff, the home console thing, and just switch over to the cheaper arcade stuff. And while I was doing that, I was selling my games, which I will go on record as saying is probably the worst idea I've ever had, was selling those games.
Let me go on record to say that every decision you've made is the worst decision you've ever made.
I regret everything.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I always everything's a regret with what I've done. But anyways, I'm trying to sell this stuff, and some of the things I still have now because I couldn't give them away at the time. I was trying to sell a certain game for $350. No one wanted it. Now, easily $1,500 for this particular game.
That's crazy. And let me say that I remember going to garage sales and finding, say, a Sega Genesis. Nothing exotic. They couldn't give it away. $5 for a system and 20 games. Now, you're not going to find a baseline Sega Genesis for under $80, period. You're not going to find it. And I remember going to pawn shops, and they basically couldn't give them away.
They probably wouldn't take them either after a certain point.
And now it's absolutely insane. It's absolutely cost prohibitive to get into any of that era, basically from Nintendo to PlayStation 2, really, if you want to talk about the time frame.
Definitely. And now there's some 360 games that are going up there.
And it's an Xbox.
It's ridiculous.
It's insane to me.
Yeah, there's so many things that I've put off buying because I was like, oh, I'll just get it another day, that have gone through the roof.
Yep.
$100 Genesis games that are not, Japanese version of the Genesis is called the Mega Drive.
Yep.
So there's games that I've wanted to get. The Japanese version of Castlevania Bloodlines that's on, the Japanese version of the Genesis.
Right.
Used to be $150, and that at the time, this was a long time ago, just remember thinking man, that is ridiculous. I'll hold off on it now and get it later. Now, what, $500 maybe?
So what you're saying is, if you want it, you're thinking about getting it, get it now because it's going to be worth some money.
Yeah. Anything that you think you might want now, just fucking get it. Because you aren't going to get it.
Right. I agree with that assessment. I've definitely held off on buying certain games And I've kept, so I have original games from PlayStation 1 and 2 and 3 where I'm like, I'm not getting rid of them. But there's a whole lot of other Nintendo stuff, things that I've gotten rid of that I'm like, I'm an idiot for getting rid of them. Because now I want to play them. And, Switch is in that weird state right now where they don't have a good retro library. You can't just buy Mario 3 if you want to play it. You can't just go and play it as easily as like on the Wii or the Wii U. So you're really...
I would say that eventually it'll probably make its way on there.
Eventually, but it'll probably be like $40. I mean, don't you think that'll be some outrageous price?
I don't think so, no.
Because what they're going to do is they're going to virtual console it because it's a different system, and because they had to slightly modify it and make it a virtual console thing, that's going to justify some ridiculous price on something. And the thing is, like, I remember like the original Nintendo being like astronomically expensive, because I did buy Mario 2 with my own money. My brother and I had saved our money to buy Mario 2, and it was a huge deal. And it was like, I think it was like $80.
I know Mario 3 was around that much when it came out.
Because I remember going to like JCPenney and actually buying it. And that's kind of a weird concept that you go to JCPenney to buy a video game.
Oh shit, I would go to Kohl's to buy Super Nintendo games. How weird is that? They didn't even have Kohl's cash back then.
So I think I went to JCPenney to buy Mario 2 when it came out. And I do believe it was like $80 in the late 80s, early 90s money.
Yeah, I wasn't paying too much attention back then because I was a kid and I wasn't buying my own games when I had a Nintendo. It very well could be. I wouldn't doubt it.
I feel that's the cost of it, and it was like an agonizing decision.
Do you know the story behind Super Mario Brothers 2?
I'm not sure. Do I know it?
So obviously, it's a very different game than Mario 1 and Mario 3.
Absolutely it is.
So, really, the game in Japan is Doki Doki Panic. And for America, they reskinned the characters in the game to Mario Brothers characters.
Very interesting, okay.
So it is a totally different game. And then later on in Japan, it got released as Super Mario Brothers USA. And so that's why it's like that one out of all of them is so different than what you're used to.
Yeah, it was a very clear departure. So what you're saying is Mario Brothers 3 is really a true sequel to Mario Brothers 1.
Pretty much.
And that Mario Brothers really is a weird follow-up to Donkey Kong Arcade. Because I do remember playing Donkey Kong in an arcade setting.
Did you ever play Mario Brothers in the arcade?
Yeah, I did, actually, yeah. Yep, Mario Brothers in arcade, and it was a different experience than the console version. Yes. So, that's another weird thing is like what we're talking about, kind of in between generation. So one of the things I do like is they call our generation the Oregon Trail generation.
And number munchers, I guess you could probably throw in there too.
Indeed. Anyways,
we'll call it at that.
We'll call it that.
We'll revisit more stuff later.
Indeed.
But we got our rambling on.
I'm good and lit. So this is Eric.
And this is Kyle.
And we will join you next week on Two Poor Bastards.